cherished friend and colleague of many years, Malesky, left us. Number of years ago, it was Fridays in particular in the office, 2350. I'd have to dial it every few minutes to get Key on the line. Maybe I shouldn't mention that. Well, check this, check that, find out this, find out that, blah, 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 blah. God, she was marvelous. Helped me with a couple of books. And out of that, she met some editors and did a couple of books herself. And oh, that's because we're set up here like that. And I want to read from this book that Key wrote, Learn Something New Every Day. And she sure helped us to do that. And I'm just going to read from, again, just learn something new every day. I'm just going to read from some of the dates. I began to thumb through it today, and interesting stuff each and every day. You know, because we're very big, particularly Morning Edition used to say today's the day and an anniversary of anniversaries. And so there's always something you can mark every day with, and she found something that was interesting and often not obvious. Maybe some of you out there will have these as birthdays. January 11th, Little Stinkers. In 1963, Key wrote, cigarettes were ubiquitous. People smoked in airplanes, offices, restaurants, elevators, and wherever they chose. Numerous studies from scientific and medical groups had already shown the dangers of tobacco, particularly regarding lung cancer. But 45% of Americans were regular smokers. That's an astonishing statistic.
It really is.
On January 11, 1964, that began to change. On that day, Surgeon General Luther Terry brought 200 journalists to the State Department Auditorium in Washington, D.C., and closed the doors. He chose the Saturday. On our show, we like to say everything happens on Saturday. Closed the doors. He chose a Saturday so the stock market would not be adversely affected by what he was about to say. For the next 2 hours, he presented a 387-page report titled Smoking and Health, which concluded that, quote, cigarette smoking is a health hazard of sufficient importance to the United States to warrant appropriate remedial action. The report became front-page news around the country, with most of the media predicting that smoking might drop for a time, but would bounce back quickly. That view was expressed in person on the street interviews. I can stop drinking, but not smoking, said one. I love these little stinkers, responded another. Legislation began to take some steps, beginning with the 1965 law that required a health warning on packs of cigarettes. 4 years later, television and radio advertising for cigarettes was banned. By 2010, the number of Americans who regularly smoke was down to 19.3%.
That's still amazingly high.
Still amazingly high. I like to think it's, 15 years later, it's got to be even lower. But
SR will tell us. Thank you for turning this into a public service announcement about smoking, in addition to in memory of Key.
Oh, yes, yeah. So January 12th. You know what that marks? According to Key Malesky, smelly cinema. With the advent of television in the 1950s, the film industry, my mother used to talk about this, was deeply worried about losing its audience. The studio tried a number of experiments to lure viewers back to the theaters, including Cinerama 3D, and perhaps oddest of all, Smell-O-Vision. Have you ever heard of this?
No.
Smell-O-Vision? My mother used to talk about this. I'll hear what she said in a moment. The invention was bankrolled by Mike Todd Jr., the son of the famous film producer, and it could deliver up to 30 different smells, triggered by the film's soundtrack and fed to the seats through specially installed tubing. Yet before the first film made this process, Scent of Mystery was released, another smell system was rushed through production. Aromorama fed the smells through the theater's air conditioning system. It was used to add scents to a documentary on China that had already been shot. New York Times critic Bosley Crowther called it a stunt and said its artistic benefit was nil. That didn't help Scent of Mystery when it was released a few weeks later in January 1960 in the Battle of the Smellies. Both systems were financial failures, with Time magazine proclaiming that, quote, most customers will probably agree that the smell they like best was the one they got during intermission. Fresh air. In recent years, a few films have experimented with scratch and sniff cards distributed to the audience who can release aromas according to on-screen cues. My mother told me she went to a smell-o-vision film, and one of the things where the scene would change, and like you would be smelling flowers in the previous scene, and next scene would be in a sewer, that sort of thing. So in any event, she said it didn't work. January 15th, the Great Molasses Flood. Have you heard of this?
No.
In Boston's North End, January 15, 1919, a gigantic tank full of molasses exploded, spilling more than 2 million gallons of sticky, viscous fluid into the streets in a brown wave that was probably 15 feet high at first and moved at 35 miles per hour. I heard something like machine gun bullets, said survivor Albert Nustone, remembering the event 75 years later. And then when I looked, I saw it was the ripping of a tank, and a big piece of the tank blew up in the air and went over and landed in the North End Park. And a house that was on Clarkville Terrace and Commercial Street was blown right into the molasses going down the street.
Oh my
That's quite
goodness.
a phrase. Workers who had been near the tank were sucked into thick, sweet muck and swept away. Oh my God. The wave crashed into buildings, filling basements and causing people, this is sad, to drown. Shards from the tank buckled the support for the elevated railway tracks, and an oncoming train was barely able to stop in time.
My goodness.
21 people were killed, 150 injured. Cleanup of the city took months, and cleanup of the legal claims lasted for years. The court eventually ruled that the tank zone of the United States Industrial Alcohol Company was responsible for the disaster, although the exact cause was never determined. The company claimed an anarchist had planted a bomb in the tank. Old-time Bostonians say that this area of the city smelled of molasses, especially on hot days, for decades afterwards.
My goodness.
Okay, get ready for something here. February 1, naval life.
Wait, say that again?
Naval life,
Okay.
but EL. Scientists from North Carolina State University and the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences are running something called the Belly Button Diversity Project. They collect samples of the many microorganisms that live in our navels.
This sounds dreadful.
Grow them in the lab and identify and sequence them. Oh my God. Well, it's important work. The navel provides a good source for studying bacteria and fungi. It's an area of the body that is isolated from other parts, doesn't excrete anything, ideally, and probably isn't washed very often. Some of us wash our navels every day, if not more. And the project's website points out each person's microbial jungle is so rich, colorful, and dynamic that in all likelihood, your body hosts species that no scientist has ever studied. Your navel may well be one of the last biological frontiers.
Oh my goodness.
The researchers also hope this project will help people understand that most of the microbes living in our bodies are not harmful. As one explained, having an appreciation for the abundance of life just inside our belly buttons can help us to see just how connected we are to the whole living world around us. Oh, all right. I love this story that's coming up. February 6th or February 5th. Is that today?
It is.
That's right, because I turned to this one first. Evidence consumed. Listen to this. The era of prohibition brought with it speakeasies, organized crime, and some unusual days in the courthouse. Take, for instance, a trial in Los Angeles in 1928. The jurors were considering the case of a hotel clerk named George Bevan, or maybe it was Joseph Bevan, who was charged with violating the Right Act, the California version of the federal Volstead Act, which banned alcohol. The prosecution's chief evidence was a pint bottle of bootleg liquor. During their 3 hours of deliberation, the jurors decided that they needed to be certain that the evidence was truly alcohol and asked the bailiff to bring them the bottle. In the quest for assurance, 9 of the 12 jurors consumed almost the entire bottle, thereby destroying the evidence against Bevan, who was subsequently acquitted. The judge handed the hauled the 9 before the bench, where they admitted to drinking the evidence, but said it was only for the honorable purpose of determining the truth of the matter. The judge called it a breach of conduct and dismissed them from further judicial service. And listen to this. Found in translation. February 10th. We use the names of countries every day, usually without knowing or even wondering what those words mean or how they have evolved. Translating them may reveal something about history and a worldview. Here, says Malesky, a few interesting examples. Know how Argentina got its name?
No.
Latin for of silver.
Oh, of course.
Australia?
I don't know.
Latin for southern land. This one you may know. Bahamas? Think Bahamar.
No.
Shallow sea in Spanish.
Ah.
Bhutan. Sanskrit for at the end of Tibet.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I guess if I knew Sanskrit, that would be. Well, that's at the end of Tibet. Burkina Faso, from 2 local languages, meaning land of the incorruptible. Wonder if they've had any corruption scandals in Burkina Faso. Cameroon, I wondered about this. From the Portuguese, Rio de Camarões, river of shrimp. Canada?
51 states.
The state of Canada. Kidding. Canadians, if anyone's tuned in, I'm kidding. No terrorists to see this. It's the Iroquois word for village or settlement.
Oh.
Hong Kong? Cantonese word for fragrant harbor. Ireland?
The Greenland?
Close, from the Celtic word air, fertile place. Liechtenstein? German word for bright stone. Singapore, from the Sanskrit term for lion city. Venezuela, a variation of the Italian for Little Venice. And I will just add, I hope this one will be as a late gift. February 28th.
Oh.
The one bad golf hole. You stand in the tee box, you line up your drive. The pin is 3 miles away and 2,550 feet down. That's because you're on top of Socorro Peak in New Mexico, participating in the one-hole El Fuego Baca Shootout. A side event of the Socorro Open since 1960, the shootout presents a number of challenges for the ardent golfer. Rattlesnakes, scorpions, and the occasional mountain lion among them. Rather than the traditional cup, the target is a 50-foot chalk circle in the campus of New Mexico Tech. Given the rough terrain, players are permitted to use a tee to set each shot and have 3 spotters find the balls in the rocks in the scrub. A medical team also goes along in case of emergencies. Players are allowed 10 balls. A lost ball that can't be located within 20 minutes costs 1 penalty stroke. Scores can be in the 70s, which would be great if you were playing 8 holes instead of 1. But the record is an amazing 9 strokes. Can I read one more?
Of course.
You know what day it's going to be.
Yes.
No, not that one. I am going to read. Oh, I don't want to read this one. I was going to read April 24.
Okay.
But it's about the first cosmonaut to die in space. It was a sad story. Let me try November 2nd. Is that all right?
Mm-hmm.
Twin sisters. The Dakota Territory was created in 1861 from land that had been the southernmost or northernmost section of Louisiana Purchase. At first, the new territory included the area from the Minnesota border west to what later became part of Montana. Wyoming and Idaho, after a few years, its size was reduced. Congress voted to admit North and South Dakota to the Union February 1899. There had been some who supported the idea of an East and West Dakota, divided by the Missouri River. President Benjamin Harrison signed the statehood proclamations on November 2nd, 1899. He was reluctant to choose which state would become a state first, which Dakota would become a state first, so a plan was devised whereby, quote, no one knew which of the new states was born first, that all hands at the birth of the twins were by legerdemain kept from knowing which territory first answered the functions of statehood. The proclamations were mixed up, then signed with the headings covered and then mixed up again, so the president himself could not tell which proclamation he signed first. I never knew this. Because North Dakota is first alphabetically, it became the 39th state, and South Dakota the 40th.
Mm.
Thank you, Key Malesky. And you know, I just noticed, wow. I'm not even going to, I just noticed I had some notes in the book.
You probably interviewed her about it.
Oh, I did, for sure. But I mean, oh my God. Key Malesky was great. Great spirit, great person.
I think we should read from her book again.
We will read from her
It's
book
wonderful.
again. It is great. We're going to read from her book again. So thanks very much.
And it's a charming cover.
It is a charming cover. Look at that. Do you remember when she was the inspiration for a PBS after school special, the Key Malesky story? I was looking at you, darling, but yes. So thanks very much for being with us on our open book. See you tomorrow night. Take care. Bye-bye.